It was a crisp, cool morning in a small town where the streets were just waking up. The sun had barely risen, and people were starting to go about their daily routines. Cars hummed along the road, and the usual buzz of life was beginning to fill the air. But on this particular morning, something was about to happen that would shake the quiet town to its core. A young black woman, who had lived in the town all her life, was walking down the street, her mind focused on her plans for the day. She was a woman of strength, known for her calm demeanor and inner confidence. Her name was Jasmine, and though she wasn't well known, she was highly respected by those who truly understood her. Jasmine was the kind of person who kept to herself, always smiling politely, but never getting too involved in the drama around her. She had plans to meet some friends later that day and was walking past the local park when she noticed the familiar sound of hooves clopping along the pavement. She didn't pay much attention at first, thinking it was just one of the town's many police officers patrolling the area. After all, she had seen them countless times, most of them simply going about their work without causing any trouble. But this time was different. The officer on horseback wasn't just riding past. He was coming straight toward her, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto her figure. This officer, Officer Blake, was well known in the town. He had a reputation for being tough, and some would say he had a tendency to act harshly, especially toward people he thought were troublemakers. Blake was a man who prided himself on enforcing the rules, but over time, his actions had earned him the nickname Rough Rider among the locals. His sharp words and quick temper made many uneasy. Jasmine wasn't worried at first. She had seen Officer Blake before and had never had any trouble with him. But as he drew nearer, she noticed the way he was staring at her, his eyes cold and calculating. Without warning, he suddenly pulled his horse to a halt right in front of her, blocking her path. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. In the days that followed the press conference, the town seemed to hold its breath. The news coverage was widespread, and for the first time, people were talking openly about what had happened. Jasmine's brave decision to speak up had sparked something deep within the community, a sense of awareness and a call for change that couldn't be ignored. The phone calls started pouring in, both from people in the town and from news outlets. People shared their stories, some of them echoing Jasmine's experience, while others were more subtle, long-buried grievances about the police force's behavior. It wasn't just Officer Blake anymore. Jasmine had unknowingly opened the door to a larger conversation about systemic issues in the town. She hadn't expected to start a movement, but that was exactly what was happening. Jasmine received a call from Marcus one evening, his voice full of urgency. "We're getting a lot of support, Jasmine. It's not just locals now. There's been a wave of interest from activists, and even some legal groups. People are paying attention." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her mind still racing from everything that had happened. The town that had always felt so familiar to her was suddenly filled with voices she had never heard before. They were all calling for change. She had wanted to make a difference, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly things would escalate. It felt like she had lit a spark that was spreading faster than she could keep up with. "I never thought it would get this big," Jasmine admitted, the weight of it all sinking in. "I thought it was just about what happened to me." Marcus's voice softened. "It's bigger than that, Jasmine. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who's been silenced, for everyone who's been made to feel like their voice doesn't matter. You've started something that can't be undone." Jasmine felt a mixture of pride and fear. She had never imagined herself being at the center of such a movement. She had only wanted to stand up for herself, but now, she was leading a cause that could change the course of the town's future. The enormity of it all was overwhelming. The next few days were a blur. Jasmine met with several community leaders, activists, and even legal advisors who had come forward to offer their support. They all echoed the same sentiment: this was a moment for the town to take a hard look at its history and its future. There were talks of organizing protests, filing formal complaints, and even pushing for a full investigation into the town's police department. But not everyone was supportive. Jasmine could feel the divide growing. Some people, including many of the town's older residents, were uncomfortable with the attention the situation was getting. They preferred to keep things quiet, to avoid stirring up trouble. To them, the town had always been peaceful, and they didn't want to risk ruining that reputation. They didn't understand why Jasmine was making such a big deal out of what seemed to be a single incident. Jasmine tried to ignore the criticism, but it was hard. She had always been someone who valued harmony, someone who avoided conflict. But now, she realized that silence wasn't an option. The people who were criticizing her didn't understand what it was like to live in fear, to feel like you were being watched, judged, and treated unfairly. They hadn't seen the way Officer Blake had treated her or the way he had treated others. Despite the resistance, Jasmine knew she couldn't back down. She had already made the decision to fight, and she wasn't going to let anyone's discomfort stop her from doing what was right. Then came the day that changed everything. Jasmine was sitting in her apartment, going over some documents when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus. "Marcus, we've got the official response. The police department is launching an internal investigation into Officer Blake. They're claiming they're taking the situation seriously, but we both know this isn't enough. We need to push for more." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when the police department had to acknowledge the issue. But Jasmine wasn't satisfied with just an investigation. She had seen how easy it was for these kinds of things to be swept under the rug. She knew they needed to demand real change, not just empty promises. She picked up the phone and called Marcus right away. "An internal investigation isn't enough," she said firmly. "We need more. We need accountability. This isn't just about one officer. It's about the system. It's about the way people like me have been treated for years." Marcus sighed. I know. But this is a step. It's something. We can't lose momentum now. We have to push them. Keep the pressure on." Jasmine nodded, her mind already racing with ideas. This wasn't just a fight for herself anymore, it was a fight for everyone who had been treated unfairly, for everyone who had been made to feel invisible. She had become the face of this fight, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed the community behind her. Over the next few weeks, they organized rallies and community meetings, where people shared their experiences with the police. The turnout was overwhelming. People from all walks of life came forward to tell their stories of discrimination, stories of mistreatment, stories of fear. Jasmine's courage had given them the courage to speak out. She had shown them that it was possible to stand up to the system, even when it seemed impossible. The media coverage intensified, and soon, the story was reaching far beyond the town. National outlets picked up the story, and people from all over the country were sending messages of support. The pressure on the town's leadership grew, and the mayor, who had initially stayed silent, was forced to speak out. "We take these matters very seriously," the mayor said in a press conference. "An investigation is underway, and we will take appropriate action if any wrongdoing is found. Our community values peace and justice, and we will ensure that our police force reflects those values." But Jasmine knew that words were not enough. The mayor's statement sounded rehearsed, like a way to calm the public without actually addressing the root of the problem. She knew that the town needed real change, not just promises. That's when Marcus suggested something bold: a petition to demand an independent investigation into the police department, with a focus on addressing systemic issues like racial profiling and excessive force. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jasmine knew it was the right move. She couldn't just settle for the status quo. Not now. The petition gained traction quickly. People from all over the town signed it, and soon, they had thousands of signatures. The petition was presented to the town council, demanding that they take real action. This wasn't just about Officer Blake anymore. This was about changing the way the police operated in the town, about ensuring that no one would ever have to fear the very people who were supposed to protect them. The council had no choice but to listen. They agreed to implement a series of reforms, including better training for officers on racial sensitivity and the use of force, as well as the creation of a civilian oversight committee to monitor police actions. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't everything Jasmine had hoped for, but it was a start. The town had taken a step forward. And that, Jasmine knew, was just the beginning. As she stood at the front of the final rally, watching the crowd of supporters around her, Jasmine realized that she had done more than just stand up to one officer. She had started a movement that would continue long after the headlines faded. The fight wasn't over, but it had begun to change the course of history in her town. And that was something worth fighting for. Asmin couldn't believe how quickly things were moving. After her meeting with Marcus, she had felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. She had known this wasn't going to be easy, but she hadn't realized just how much work would go into exposing the truth about Officer Blake's actions. It wasn't just about one officer anymore, it was about the system that allowed this kind of behavior to continue unchecked. Marcus had introduced her to a few key people who had been active in advocating for change in the town. They weren't well-known figures, but they were passionate, and they knew the ins and outs of how things worked behind the scenes. Jasmine was still trying to wrap her head around all of it. It was a lot to take in, and she felt like she was being pulled in 1,000 different directions. But there was something else, something more personal, that was driving her forward. Justice. She couldn't just stand by and let Officer Blake get away with what he had done. She couldn't let the people in the town continue to live in fear. Over the next few days, Jasmine and Marcus worked together, laying out a plan. They decided the best course of action was to start small, gathering support from the community first. They would talk to people who had witnessed similar incidents and bring their stories to light. The idea was to create a wave of pressure that would be impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Marcus called Jasmine with some important news. "We've got our first lead," he said excitedly. "A woman came forward. She's willing to share her story about being mistreated by Officer Blake a few months ago. It's exactly the kind of thing we need." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment when everything started to change. She had always believed that if people stood together, they could make a difference, and now she was seeing it in action. The woman who came forward, Lisa, was a middle-aged mother who had lived in the town for years. She had been stopped by Officer Blake during a routine traffic stop. What should have been a simple encounter turned into something much more complicated when Blake began questioning her in an aggressive manner. Lisa had done nothing wrong, but the officer's attitude quickly escalated. When she tried to explain that she was just trying to get home after a long day at work, Blake became more hostile, demanding that she get out of the car. He treated her like a criminal, and Lisa felt helpless. "I knew it was wrong," Lisa told Jasmine when they met. "But I didn't say anything at the time. I didn't think anyone would believe me, especially not against a cop. He's got the power, and I'm just, well, nobody. But I can't keep quiet anymore. What happened to you? What he did to you? That's not okay." Jasmine felt a surge of emotion as she listened to Lisa's story. It wasn't just about what had happened to her, it was about all the others who had been mistreated, all the others who had been silenced out of fear. Jasmine could see how Lisa's voice had been stifled for so long, but now, she was speaking out. And it was because Jasmine had done the same. Lisa's courage gave Jasmine even more strength to keep going. Over the next week, they continued to gather stories from others in the community. Some were reluctant to come forward, afraid of the consequences. But slowly, more people began to speak up. Each person added a new layer to the story, each voice building on the last until the truth could no longer be ignored. The pressure was mounting, and it was only a matter of time before something had to be done. Jasmine knew they had to go public. She had been hesitant at first, unsure of how the town would react. But Marcus had been persistent. "It's time, Jasmine," he said one evening. "We've gathered enough stories, and the town needs to hear them. We need to shine a light on this before it gets any worse." It wasn't easy. Jasmine had never imagined herself in the spotlight, but here she was, about to speak to the media about something that had shaken her to her core. The idea of standing up to the town's authority, especially a police officer like Blake, was daunting, but she knew it was the right thing to do. She couldn't back down now. The day of the press conference arrived, and Jasmine stood in front of the crowd, her hands trembling slightly but her resolve stronger than ever. The news cameras were rolling, and reporters from various outlets had gathered to cover the event. Marcus was standing beside her, offering quiet support. Jasmine took a deep breath, then stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm here today because something happened that shouldn't have. Officer Blake, who works in this town, dragged me across the street in broad daylight. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just walking. But he didn't care. He treated me like I was a criminal, and that's not okay." She paused for a moment, scanning the faces of the reporters, some of whom were taking notes, others filming her every word. Jasmine could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her, but she refused to back down. "This isn't just about what happened to me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about what's happening to people in this town every day. People who are afraid to speak out because they know the power the police hold. People who have been silenced for too long. I'm here to make sure their voices are heard. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." There was a brief silence as the words hung in the air. Jasmine could see the shock on some of the faces in the crowd, but she wasn't finished yet. She wasn't about to let this moment slip away. "I've spoken to others who have been mistreated by Officer Blake," she continued. "And they're not alone. I'm here to stand up for them, and I'm asking everyone in this town to stand with me. We can't let this kind of behavior continue. We can't let fear keep us quiet. This is our town, and we deserve better." As she finished speaking, Jasmine stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had spoken out, and now, there was no turning back. The story was out there, and the town would have to confront the truth. The reporters began shouting questions, but Jasmine didn't answer them. She had said what she needed to say. It was now up to the people in the town to decide what to do with the information. She had done her part. As she walked away from the podium, she could feel the eyes of the reporters on her. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: things were never going to be the same. Oing. As Officer Blake stood in front of Jasmine, his mind was starting to shift. He had expected a quick and easy way to assert his power, a simple act of control over someone he saw as weak or beneath him. But now, something felt off. His grip on Jasmine's arm loosened slightly, and for the first time, he hesitated. Jasmine walked away from the scene, her heart still racing, but a sense of calm slowly started to settle over her. The crowd had dispersed, but the shock of what had just happened lingered in the air. She could still feel the weight of the officer's hand on her arm, the way he had tried to drag her like she was nothing, but it was different now. Now, she had stood her ground. And she wasn't going to let anyone forget it. As she made her way down the street, she couldn't help but replay the encounter in her mind. What had just happened? Why had Officer Blake reacted the way he did? She didn't understand it, but she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end. The fight was far from over, and now, she had to decide what her next move would be. Jasmine lived in a small town where things like this didn't happen often. Sure, there were always whispers of tension between the police and the local community, But most people just ignored it. The idea of standing up to an officer, especially one like Blake, was something most people would never do. It was just too risky. But Jasmine wasn't most people. She couldn't just walk away from this. Her mind kept circling back to something. She had caught a glimpse of something in Blake's eyes when he had finally let go of her, the hesitation, the confusion. It was as if, for a moment, he wasn't sure what to do. She knew he had a reputation for being tough, but she hadn't expected him to back down so quickly. It made her wonder if he had known who she was, if that was why he had let go of her so suddenly. The more Jasmine thought about it, the more she realized that the incident wasn't just about her. It was about everything that had been hidden beneath the surface of this town. For years, people had quietly accepted the unfair treatment, the unspoken divide between the officers and the black community. But now, Jasmine had started something. And whether she liked it or not, she was going to be the one to bring it all to light. As she arrived at her apartment, Jasmine closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. Her legs were still shaky, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline that had coursed through her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But the feeling of injustice was still there, simmering beneath the surface. She had just been dragged through the street like she was a criminal. But why? What had she done to deserve that? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced down at the screen and saw a message from her best friend, Mia. Mia, are you okay? I saw what happened. I'm so sorry, Jasmine. Let me know if you need anything. We can't just let this go. Jasmine stared at the message for a moment before typing her response. Jasmine, I'm fine, Mia. But this isn't over. I'm going to make sure it's not. We can't just let them get away with this. Mia didn't respond immediately, but Jasmine knew her friend would be there for her. Mia had always been the one to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. She would support Jasmine, just like she always had. As the hours passed, Jasmine tried to relax, but her mind kept going back to the incident with Officer Blake. She knew this wasn't something she could just forget. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been mistreated, everyone who had been silenced. And that was something she couldn't ignore. Later that evening, Jasmine received another message, but this time, it wasn't from Mia. It was from someone else. Someone she didn't expect to hear from: Marcus, the businessman who had spoken up during the encounter. She had seen him in the crowd, but she hadn't expected him to be watching so closely. Marcus, Jasmine, I just wanted to reach out. What happened today was wrong, and I can't just sit by and let it go. I know people in town who can help with this, people who want to see change. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk more about how we can make this right. Jasmine sat down on the couch, staring at the message. Marcus was well known in the town, respected by many for his success and influence. But Jasmine had never really spoken to him before. She didn't know much about him, other than the fact that he was an important figure in the community. And now, he was offering to help. She hesitated for a moment before replying. Jasmine, I appreciate you reaching out. I don't know what you can do, but I'm willing to listen. When can we meet? Marcus responded quickly, suggesting they meet the following afternoon at a local cafe. Jasmine agreed, though she wasn't sure what to expect. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but at the same time, she knew she needed all the help she could get. The next day, Jasmine arrived at the cafe early, her mind swirling with thoughts of what the meeting would bring. She sat at a table near the window, watching the people go by outside, trying to calm her nerves. She had been through so much in the past 24 hours, and now, it felt like everything was about to change. When Marcus walked in, he immediately spotted her and made his way over. He was a tall man, dressed in a neatly pressed suit, his posture confident. He extended his hand to Jasmine as he sat down across from her. "Jasmine, thank you for meeting with me," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable, and I want to make sure something is done about it." Jasmine nodded, her hands resting on the table in front of her. "I didn't expect this kind of support, especially from someone like you," she said, her voice guarded. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Because what happened wasn't just wrong for you, Jasmine. It's wrong for everyone. And if we don't take a stand now, nothing will change. This town has been ignoring the problem for too long, and I can't sit by and watch it happen." Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope in her chest, but she was cautious. "What do you suggest we do?" "I have connections," Marcus said. "People who can help us make this a public issue. We can take this to the news, get people talking. But I need to know that you're ready for this. This isn't going to be easy." Jasmine took a deep breath. She had been ready for a fight from the moment she'd been dragged through the street, but now it felt real. The weight of what was ahead hit her like a wave, but she wasn't going to back down. She had already stood up once. She could do it again. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Let's make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Jasmine stood tall, refusing to back down. Her calm expression was a stark contrast to Blake's growing frustration. She had not anticipated this morning turning into a confrontation, but now that it was happening, she wasn't going to let it go easily. There was a fire inside her, a strength that she had carried with her all her life but had never had to use in such a public way before. "I'm not getting on your horse, officer," Jasmine repeated, her voice steady but firm. "And you can't make me." Blake's face reddened with anger. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of a crowd. The fact that she wasn't cowering, that she wasn't scared of him, was unsettling. His eyes flickered toward the bystanders who were quietly watching, their phones recording every moment. He had seen those videos before, videos of officers overstepping their boundaries, videos that sparked outrage. He didn't want to be one of those officers. But in his mind, Jasmine was still just another woman to be controlled, another person who dared to speak back. He had never let anyone get the best of him, and he wasn't about to start now. He took a step closer, his voice lowering into a growl. "I told you to get on the horse," he said, his words slow and threatening. "Don't make this worse than it has to be." Jasmine didn't move, her eyes locked onto his. She wasn't going to let him push her around. But what she didn't know was that, in that moment, something inside Officer Blake was changing. A thought, however small, began to creep into his mind. Who was this woman? Why wasn't she afraid of him? His anger started to mix with confusion, and for a moment, he felt unsure of himself. She was just another person walking down the street, someone he had no reason to treat like this. So why was she different? Just as the tension between them reached its peak, an unexpected sound broke through the silence. The sharp voice of someone from the crowd called out, snapping Blake out of his thoughts. "That's enough, Blake," a man shouted from the edge of the group. "Let her go." Blake's head whipped toward the voice, and his grip tightened on Jasmine's arm once again, though she didn't flinch. The man who had spoken was someone Blake knew well, a local business owner, one of the more prominent figures in town. His name was Marcus, and he was known for speaking out when he saw injustice. "I said let her go," Marcus repeated, his voice filled with authority. He stepped forward, and a few others in the crowd began to murmur in agreement. Blake shot a warning look at Marcus but didn't respond. The last thing he wanted was to be confronted by someone else, but his control over the situation was slipping away, piece by piece. He had expected to be the one in charge, the one everyone feared, but now, things were different. Jasmine's mind raced. She had heard of Marcus before. He was a businessman, well respected and successful. She knew he had influence in the town, but she didn't expect him to step in. It made her feel a small sense of relief, though she knew she still had to handle the situation herself. She took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you can do whatever you want because you're a cop?" she asked Blake. "You think you can just drag people around because you're in uniform?" Blake didn't respond immediately. His hands shook slightly, and for the first time, he felt a hint of doubt in his mind. Jasmine's calmness was unsettling, but there was something else about her that struck him. Something he couldn't place. She wasn't like the others he had come across. She wasn't intimidated by his badge or his authority. He had expected her to beg, to apologize, but she wasn't doing any of that. The crowd had grown larger, and more people were starting to take notice. Phones were out, capturing everything, and the air was thick with tension. Jasmine could feel the weight of the situation. She could feel the eyes on her, but she also felt a strange sense of empowerment. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about showing everyone that they didn't have to be afraid. Blake hesitated once more, his thoughts swirling. He had dealt with people before, but something about Jasmine felt different. The realization hit him slowly, like a wave crashing over him. She wasn't just a random woman on the street. She was someone important, someone who had power he hadn't recognized at first. Her calmness, her refusal to bow down to him, everything about her made him realize he had made a huge mistake. But it was too late to take back what he had done. His mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do next. He couldn't just let her go, not after everything that had happened. But the pressure from the crowd, from the people around him, was growing stronger. Jasmine watched Blake closely, her eyes sharp and unwavering. She could see the struggle in his expression, the internal conflict that he was trying to hide. She knew that he was realizing something he hadn't known before. He wasn't in control anymore. He had lost his grip on the situation, and it was starting to unravel around him. "I'm not getting on that horse," Jasmine repeated, her voice steady. "And I'm not afraid of you." Blake's grip on her arm tightened for a moment, but then he slowly released her, stepping back. He stared at her for a moment, his face a mixture of confusion, anger, and something else, something that looked like regret. "Get out of here," he muttered, turning away from her. His voice was low, barely audible, as if he didn't want anyone to hear the defeat in his tone. "Just leave." Jasmine didn't move at first. She watched as Blake walked away, his head down, defeated. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, and she knew that this was far from over. She had stood up to him, but the larger fight was just beginning. The crowd slowly began to disperse, people murmuring to each other as they walked away. Marcus gave Jasmine a nod of approval before he disappeared into the crowd, his figure vanishing in the distance. Jasmine stood there for a moment, her heart still racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. But in some ways, she was proud of herself. She had stood her ground, and she had forced a powerful man to realize that not everyone could be controlled. But deep down, Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. The officer had let her go for now, but the consequences of what had happened would soon come to light. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to let what had happened be swept under the rug. As she turned to walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. Jasmine blinked, taken aback by the question. She hadn't done anything wrong, so the question seemed strange to her. "I'm just walking down the street," she replied, her tone calm but firm. Officer Blake wasn't satisfied with her answer. He seemed to grow more agitated as he eyed her, his posture stiff. "Just walking down the street," he repeated. "You know this area is for people with business here, right?" Jasmine felt her heart rate pick up. Something about the officer's tone seemed off, almost as if he was looking for a reason to cause trouble. She stood tall, holding her ground. "I live here, officer. I don't need a reason to be on my own street." Blake's eyes narrowed even more, and his jaw clenched. "I don't like your attitude," he said, his voice now laced with anger. "You should watch how you speak to me." Jasmine's mind raced. She couldn't understand why the officer was being so aggressive. She had done nothing to provoke him. But it was clear to her now that he wasn't going to let her go easily. She took a deep breath and tried to stay calm, knowing that keeping her composure was the only way to defuse the situation. "I'm sorry if I said something wrong, officer," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "But I'm just walking to meet a friend, and I'm not causing any trouble." But Officer Blake wasn't listening. His eyes had gone cold, and he wasn't backing down. Instead, he swung his leg over the horse and dismounted with a swift movement. His heavy boots hit the ground with a thud as he stood in front of Jasmine, towering over her. He was taller and broader than her, but she refused to let that intimidate her. Without a word, Blake reached out and grabbed her arm, yanking her roughly toward the horse. Jasmine gasped in surprise, her eyes wide with shock. She tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. He dragged her through the street, ignoring her protests, as if she were just another piece of trash to be dealt with. The people nearby stood frozen, some with their mouths open, others with phones already raised to record the scene. But no one moved to help. They were too afraid to intervene, too intimidated by Officer Blake's authority. Jasmine's mind raced as she tried to break free from his grip, but the officer's force only tightened around her. "You need to learn some respect," Blake muttered, his breath hot against her ear as he continued to drag her toward his horse. The crowd watched in silence, unsure of what to do or what was happening. Jasmine felt humiliated, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She wasn't going to let him win. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to think of a way out. She could feel the eyes of the people on her, but she knew she had to keep her cool. She wasn't going to let this officer get away with this. She was stronger than this. "Let go of me," Jasmine yelled, trying to break free from his hold. But Blake only laughed, his voice cruel. "You should be more careful about who you talk back to," he said, his grip never loosening. Jasmine's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who might step in, but everyone seemed to be too afraid to act. No one spoke up. The officer's power was too overwhelming, and the town's residents had seen enough to know what would happen if they tried to help her. The officer reached his horse and roughly shoved Jasmine in front of it. "Get on," he ordered. Jasmine felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. She had never been treated this way before, not in her own town, not by anyone, especially not a police officer. She could feel the anger rising inside of her, but she knew she had to be smart. She couldn't let this escalate into something worse. She could feel her pulse in her ears as she stood, shaking with the rush of emotions. "I'm not getting on that horse," she said through gritted teeth. She stood her ground, her back straight, her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't going to let this officer treat her like some criminal when she had done nothing wrong. The officer seemed to take a step back for a moment, looking at her with a mixture of confusion and irritation. He wasn't used to being disobeyed. And as Jasmine stood there, resolute and unmoving, something seemed to click in the officer's mind. He wasn't just dealing with a woman from the street. There was something more about her, something he hadn't realized until that moment. The crowd had grown tense, the silence heavy in the air. Everyone knew something wasn't right, but no one dared to step in. They were too afraid of the officer's authority. Jasmine, however, stood tall, refusing to be intimidated. But Officer Blake wasn't finished yet. What he didn't know, though, was that this wasn't just any woman he was dealing with.